welcome to our quarterly transportation webinar from WASBO. It is April 23rd already. Sometimes it seems like a short year. Sometimes it seems like a really, really long year. I'm Mike Berry, Executive Director, and we have like the DPI All-Star game going on here today with this webinar. We're going to run about 59 minutes and 59 seconds, and we have really action-packed agenda. So first, just to give you some names, we're going to hear from Clara Pfeiffer and from Christine Nadolski, who are both with the DPI Title I school support and school support teams. And they're mostly going to focus on McKinney-Vento. And in which there are still aspects of McKinney-Vento I have yet to internalize, so I'll be listening. And then in part two of today's webinar, we have Rachel Zelmer and Rick Cruz. And Rachel has promised to answer all your questions about the federal government and where it's going and when you'll get your money. So thank you for that, Rachel. Oh, and by the way, she's also going to talk with Rick about special ed transportation requirements and reporting, which is actually the real purpose that she's on. If you are interested in where things are going at the federal level, and we've got a lot of business managers out there wringing their hands over this right now, you might want to join us on Friday morning at 8:30 for WASBO's Money Talks webinar. And our special guest is Tom McCarthy, who is the Deputy State Superintendent. And we figured if anybody would know, it would be Jill and or Tom. And since we figured Jill is probably too busy to join our webinar, we begged Tom. So you don't actually have to grill Rachel or Rick or Christine or Claire about the feds. We're going to cover that on Friday morning. So mark your calendar for that. And okay, so I got a couple of housekeeping things that Caitlin asked me to cover, and then we're going to get the real stuff started with Clara and Christine, focusing on McKinney-Vento. So here are the required announcements. Today's presentations are being recorded, so every mistake I made will be preserved for all of humankind, all of human time, and they will be posted later in the week by WASBO, and you'll be able to access that just by logging into your WASBO account. During today's presentation, we ask that you have your microphones off out there in the audience, especially if you have a really barky dog. But you can ask questions in the chat or the Q&A, as per usual. We will monitor that. And if we have time and we can squeeze them in, we'll try to get to your questions as well. And then lastly, you will get an email from WASBO this afternoon asking to give us some feedback on how we're doing with transportation webinars and any ideas that you might have. So those are the introductory comments. So I'm delighted that we've got such great content and great speakers today. So I'm going to turn it over, I guess, to Christine and Clara first. And we're going to do McKinney-Vento. So get your Excedrin jars out, folks, and be ready to take some good notes, because this is important stuff. Okay, so hey, good afternoon, Christine and Clara.
Hi, thanks so much, Mike.
Oh, you bet. Good to see you guys. You ready to take over?
Yeah, we're ready.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I'm going to get out of the way. You guys go do it.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Christine Nadolski.
And I am Clara Pfeiffer.
And we are really just going to focus on the transportation aspects of McKinney-Vento today. So we're not going to do like a deep dive into all things in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, but really focus on those requirements related to transportation. So starting off, one of the really big things under McKinney-Vento is that LEAs are required to provide transportation to and from the school of origin for any student experiencing homelessness. And this is including until the end of the academic year when if a student obtains permanent housing. That right still continues for the rest of that school year. So every school district is required to have a homeless liaison designated, and that homeless liaison is required to inform families of their right to transportation to and from their school of origin. If the school of origin and where the student is currently residing is within the same school district boundaries, then that school district is responsible for arranging and providing that transportation to the student. And the might just be in a building that's across town. They move to a different area just within the same school boundary. But if they're crossing school district boundary lines, then both of those school districts need to work together on how to divide the responsibility and the cost of that transportation. And if there isn't an agreement made, the law actually states that the cost just needs to be shared equally then. And we'll get into kind of what that can look like a little bit. But really one of the things I want to highlight with this is that from DPI, we always encourage homeless liaisons or maybe transportation directors to reach out to that other school district first and not just send a bill at the end of a quarter or a semester without that other school district knowing that they're sharing that cost of transportation for a student. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's on this slide. But really thinking about, again, sharing that cost 50-50 unless another arrangement is made. Other arrangements could include one district covering the cost of transportation to school, one district covering the cost of transportation home from school. It could be that the district where the student is not enrolled in, but they're residing in, has a more cost-effective way to provide transportation. And so again, that's really why that conversation ahead of time is really important. And then just a note that if you're in a school district that's really close to one of our neighboring states, because McKinney-Vento is a federal law, crossing state lines doesn't matter, that students still have all the same rights under McKinney-Vento. They still have the right to stay in their school of origin. And then those two school districts, even in neighboring states, can still share that cost and responsibility for transportation.
So we wanted to also touch on some enrollment pieces here. McKinney-Vento ensures that students experiencing homelessness are immediately enrolled in school. So we have some information that you can dig a little bit more into about that. But the most important piece of this is, while immediate is a little bit up for interpretation, the transportation has to be arranged to make sure that that isn't creating a barrier for the students that are trying to get to school. So if there isn't a really clear plan right away, if it takes a little bit of time to get the transportation fully set up, that's fine. But in the meantime, there has to be like a short-term solution to make sure that student can get to school for that immediate enrollment. And just a little bit about how you can transport students. We won't get into this too much, but it's to the discretion of the district how you're able to get those students to school. So again, it can't be presenting a barrier to that student attending school. But it would be important to consider the types of transportation. So like common ones are, your school busing, your school vans or other vehicles. Possibly it's reimbursing families or reimbursing staff if they pick them up, or city buses, cabs, etc. So you may want to consider just what the safe transportation options are within your area. And then also if there's any potential stigma that could be attached to an alternative mode of transportation. So for example, here, like if you're sending a taxi to get that student, are they the only student in their middle school that's showing up in a cab to school? And what would that feel like or look like for them? And so LEAs must provide students with transportation that is comparable to the transportation provided to all of the students. And what this looks like is if the student is living within the area that they would be and they're attending that school, whatever types of guidelines you have in place within the LEA should be and can be used for those students. So if your student is on a typical bus route or they're within your walk zone, then that is typical for all students and you can follow that guideline. There are some exceptions for this, and we do encourage you to be flexible. Many times if a family or a student is living in like a hotel or a motel, possibly a shelter, those are not areas that are always in like residential neighborhoods, and it could be a little unsafe for them to get to school, even though they might be within your walk zone. So arranging another type of transportation might be the best way to go for that.
All right. So wanted to highlight that transportation for preschool, a district administered preschool program is also required because preschool is included in the definition of school of origin. And again, this is if transportation is a barrier for the student to attend that program, and then the district must provide it. So what this really means is, again, a district administered preschool program. So what that looks like in practicality in Wisconsin is 4K, which we know almost all school districts have 4K. But that includes those, if your district has 4K community sites, it could be Head Start, it might be IDA for IDEA services through the LEA. But so keep that in mind that those all of those programs, also if the student is enrolled through your school district into those programs and they're experiencing homelessness, they also have the right to transportation to their school of origin. And so this also includes if a student is enrolled in a public preschool and moves to another school district that does not provide widely available or universal preschool. So again, in Wisconsin, this definitely is covered mostly under 4K and 4K services. So most districts have 4K here. But just really a reminder about those, again, those 4K community sites. And then also transportation needs to be provided for students to be able to participate in extracurricular activities. So really the requirement is around removing barriers to including transportation barriers to attending and participating fully in school activities. And that includes extracurricular activities. So if the transportation is a barrier, it might be a student who wants to participate in sports. It could be in after school programming. It might be in a club, any kind of extracurricular activity that your district is offering. And this could also be a little creative. Clara shared some ideas already, but this could also look like just working with, if it's for a sport, working with that coach to organize carpooling between families, or to ensure that all students, can get to school to travel to a game together. So again, it's getting a little creative, but working with the resources that you have for that activity or club or sport also.
Okay, the question, how far is too far to travel to the school of origin? So in the very first slide, we touched on that students have the right to keep attending their school of origin, or they can attend the school of residence where all their students in that neighborhood would live. So for school of origin transportation, there has to be a best interest determination about this, but there is no time or distance limit specified in McKinney-Vento. So there is no hard and fast rule on either of those things, but some of the considerations here, kind of like I had mentioned before, what is the age of the child? Is it safe for them? The mode and the length, the type, all of that thing. So any need for special instructional programs, and if you know how long they are going to be staying at whatever temporary location they're in. So if, for example, a student is moving into your district because they need to be in a hotel or motel or shelter that is within your district boundaries, but the intention is to get back into an apartment or another place that's within their school of origin boundaries, you would want to make sure that you could work with them as closely as possible to make sure that you're not interrupting that student's education and still allowing them to go to their school of origin and provide that transportation. And then, of course, we have some funding pieces. So there are lots of different ways that funding, that this can be funded. Of course, state and local funds, I think that's what a lot of districts use to cover this. Community partnerships, and also what Christine had mentioned, trying to, organize things. So maybe it's the donations for bus tickets or donations for other kind of like gas cards, or maybe it's actual community partnerships. We do have like some districts that will work with like directly with gas stations in their neighborhoods and communities. And then the Title I Part A homeless reservation funds. So this would be to cover the excess cost of transportation. So the excess cost of transportation is essentially the difference between what you would typically pay for another student to transport that student to and from school. So if you are providing transportation through a regular bus route, that wouldn't be any excess cost. If you are providing that special kind of transportation for that student, so if you don't normally send students in a taxi, for example, like that entire cost would be excess cost. So, and the only other example that we would have here would be if one of your existing buses has to reroute or meet a student in a different area, then you could use the excess cost there with these funds as well. I think that all makes sense.
Okay. And then we just wanted to provide kind of a best practice that we really encourage districts to use with families experiencing homelessness, which is a transportation contract. It's not anything that's required in the law. It's just something that we've heard from a lot of school districts is really helpful in communicating what transportation looks like with families and with youth experiencing homelessness. So it could be something that just really outlines what the mode of transportation is going to be, that the parent agrees to be at the specific bus pickup spot or ready when a driver's coming to pick them up at a specific time. And then also, like, really the intent of it is to have a clear guide of what would happen if the student no loads or doesn't get on the bus, isn't there, or bus or mode of transportation, whatever it is that's coming to get them. To have a policy for them, how many times is too many, who's going to reach out to the family when that happens, and just how all of those pieces are going to play out. And clearly outlines that so the family knows what to expect. And then the district has something to say, okay, we agreed to like 3 no loads before we needed to have a meeting and talk about this, and just really being able to stick to that. So it doesn't, hopefully it doesn't continue if that becomes an issue. So something we highly recommend. We have examples on our webpage for what those can look like. Have any questions come in about McKinney-Vento?
Hey guys, I'd like to offer just a comment if I could. So this is like the grizzled old veteran business manager kind of hat occasionally wear in this role. And it really has to do with the perspective of the business office. Um, and this is especially for younger business officials. Um, it's just the culture of the business office that, and trying to manage the budget during the year. And we would like high five each other if we saved $100 on a purchase order, or if we saved $1,000 on a bid, it's like, woohoo, we're doing great. And so, because we were really trying to manage this budget and we always knew that it was our neck on the line come July or August after the school year is over. Somebody has to go talk to the board about how the budget came out. And it was usually going to be us or me, right? So you had a lot of skin in the game, right, to try to make this work. And this is where I think sometimes the tension comes in because the types of transportation arrangements that you are describing here are, they have a couple of qualities about them. Often they are expensive, or they can be, and often they're unpredictable, um, and they're often unbudgeted. And so if you're the business manager and all of a sudden the student services director, comes walking down the hallway to say, hey, we've got this new situation and under McKinney-Vento, we're going to have to take care of this transportation and it's going to cost $100 a day and that's $18,000. So there you go. And I always have to remind the business managers, you are not allowed to, to take it out on the student services director. It's not their fault. And what we're talking about here is, after all, not discretionary, right? These are laws, and these children have the rights to these services. So you're just going to have to, get over yourself and figure out a way to pay for it. And that's where a lot of the, people say, "Oh, it's a hard job." That's where it usually comes from because they're thinking, "Oh my goodness, we're going to be way over budget." But I really wanted to get to Clara's last point, which some of this can be resolved by either having room in your budget, from state and local sources where you've got a little room to in case there's an unexpected expenditure, or the Title One and how you allocate your Title One dollars. It's part of 1A, isn't it? The slide you had on the reservation for these types of transportation services. So yeah, there it is, homeless reservation of funds. These are so there are ways to kind of budget for the unexpected, and certainly Title One Part A is a way to do that. And the other part is sometimes you just have to roll with it. It's sometimes these things just happen. And I think the key for business managers is to remember that, there's no point in pounding on the table. It doesn't work. These are required services. So figure out a way to deal with it. And that takes a long time, I think, to get that balance between, yes, you're responsible for the budget, but you're also responsible for the law and taking care of kids. And eventually, you learn how to budget in such a way that you don't have to panic every time a big unexpected expenditure comes along, because you've got a plan. So the moral of this story is leave some room in your budget, and that way you don't have to freak out, every time you get an unexpected expenditure.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, well, that's just a little coaching between WASBO and the WASBO members.
I appreciate it. Yeah, please don't yell at your student services director. They're just trying to get the kids to school.
Right.
I think I wanted to just expand a little bit because we do know the cost can be really unexpected on with your Title I Part A homeless reservation funds. Really be talking to whoever your homeless liaison is in the district. A lot of times it is the student services director. or district social worker, really talk to them about what the needs of families were this year in planning for next year. Of course, it doesn't mean a family isn't going to unexpectedly lose housing, but
Right.
to really be planning for that ahead of the year. I'm also a Title I grant reviewer. I just had a district this month change their homeless reservation from about $300 to $3,000, all for transportation. So plan for that, plan ahead of time. Obviously, it worked out for them in April, but planning for that at the beginning of the year. And then we did have questions come in. So kind of both talking about no loads.
Yeah, they're two similar questions, I think. So they're both kind of about, I think, can you discontinue the transportation if the student is not getting picked up, or you have this no load policy in place? So the simple answer is you still have to make sure the student's getting to school. So you cannot just say, nope, this is it. We're not offering this for the rest of the year or the rest of the semester, whatever it is. So what those documents should help you do is say, okay, after we send a taxi there and you don't show up, or you're not getting in that taxi for 5 times, then we need to have a conversation and determine best interest again. So is it that something is in the way of you getting on that taxi, or something else?
Yeah, and that would go back to, again, like maybe a school social worker or the student services director talking with the family about what is in the best interest of the children. Do you need an alarm clock? Okay, great, we'll get you an alarm clock, remove that barrier, and now you're getting on the transportation on time. Or is there something else going on, and do they need to look at that best interest again? Oh, it's a little more beyond just providing that transportation or not.
Yeah.
Jason has a question in here about the time frame. Is it the current school year, or is it indefinite? That's a great question. Under McKinney-Vento, the family has the right to transportation through the end of the school year. Students would have to be re-identified each year as experiencing homelessness. So if, for example, you were saying if the student is living in a shelter for 3 years in another district, would you have to continue providing transportation? Yes, if the student is living in a shelter and it's still temporary housing, they would be re-identified under McKinney-Vento each year. So yes, you would be providing transportation for all 3 years. But yeah, it's a year at a time.
And at that point, too, you're trusting your homeless liaison to be making that appropriate best interest determination for that student too.
Yeah, I should point out that it was not unusual in Madison. Rick's on this call, my colleague from Madison. We had occasionally some taxi drivers who said, "Oh, it was a no-show." And upon further investigation, we found out the taxi company blew it. And so you got to keep an open mind about don't believe everything you hear, right? Sometimes the taxi driver was, just didn't like to go to that part of town, or was having a bad day or whatever. And they were kind of quick to say, "Oh, it was a no-show." So, and then just a little advice: don't always just buy that story. I mean, 98% of the time it's probably true, but not always. So beware. It's a complicated world out there.
Okay, I think we're gonna turn it over to Rachel.
Well, hey, I just want to say before you guys step aside, so Christine and Clara, thank you so much. And all you business managers out there, these are people you can call or text or write to get answers on this. I know it is a frustrating topic when you've got budget on one hand and compliance on the other, but these are the folks who can help. So thank you again for your contribution today. And now, as we said earlier, Everybody in the country is wondering what's going on with federal funding, and Rachel is not going to answer that. But Rachel is going to talk about transportation, special ed transportation requirements and reporting, and Brooke Cruz is going to help out. So, hi, Rachel.
Hello, hello. No, when we say we don't know, we really don't know.
No.
We'll find out at the same time as everyone else. Usually I'm usually a couple days behind everyone because I can't get to my email. So I'm hoping people keep me in the loop.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about special education transportation and that there is state and federal funding available for this. But it's important first to define and understand what is transportation tied to special education. Oh, hold on a second, something happened here. Can you just see the slide now?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Looks good.
All right. So when we talk about what is specialized transportation, well, first, let's just go back. Something that we have been working on for the past probably 5 or 6 years, especially we're fiscal monitoring, but we work really closely with procedural compliance team on the special education team at DPI, and the members of the procedural compliance teams are the ones who work with school districts and parents, and if there are like IDA complaints filed or if there's misunderstanding about what's in the IEP, what services should be provided, that their work is sort of the monitoring of the program aspects of the IEP, and we monitor the fiscal components of those IEPs in special education. And transportation is really one of those areas that came together in the middle. And so several years ago, we put together a paper between special education team and school financial services. We put together a couple of papers realizing that LEAs, folks need to understand what is meant by specialized transportation first, and then we can talk about the funding. So in general, something that's really important to understand is that students with IEPs should be using the same transportation option as their non-disabled peers, unless an IEP team has determined that they can't receive FAPE without a different means of getting to and from school. So really, it comes back to being a least restricted environment component of the law, where students shouldn't be separated out from their non-disabled peers unless there is a reason tied to their disability that is necessary. And that includes transportation. So really, specialized transportation should actually be more of a rare occurrence than a common occurrence. So just because a student has an IEP and transportation is being provided by the school district does not make that specialized transportation. Specialized transportation is where the IEP team has determined that this student cannot use, like if it's an elementary school, cannot use the like regular elementary bus routes that your school district might use. Or in like middle school or high school, normally kids get there on like the city buses. Like there is a reason why that student can't take that route. Otherwise, students with IEPs who are just on the same route or using the same transportation modes as all other students, that's just a general education cost. So remember, the goal under IDEA is that our students with disabilities are with their non-disabled peers like more than 80% of the time. They're in the general ed classroom, they're using the same transportation as everyone else, or all these other things. That's our goal, and transportation is one of those. So just because a student is a student with an IEP and they're on the elementary bus doesn't make that route specialized. And that's where they should be, unless the IEP team has said, no, we have to come up with a different we have to come up with something else because this student isn't going to be able to make it to school. This student isn't going to be able to receive faith if we don't figure out a different means to get this child to school. So in these slides, I'm specifically talking about to and from school, because we'll get to different transportation situations, but this one is really just specific to and from school, a student with an IEP. So if the IEP team has decided, based on like the information and evaluations, that the student's disability is affecting their ability to get to and from school and receive faith, the IEP team is looking at exactly what is the disability that is sort of the barrier to transportation with all the other students. And so when they're looking at the students' needs, they are making the decision about specialized transportation based on medical or health needs, accessibility or a need for adaptive or assistive equipment. And of course, one that's as common is like the student's capacity to do independent transportation, is like on a bus with all the other students, or behavioral concerns, again, tied to the student's disability. So the IEP team is making the decision that some other type of transportation needs to happen in order for that student to receive faith. Now, that's really specifically, this slide is really specifically talking about a separate vehicle or a separate route. So you have a bus that's picking up all the kids, taking them to school. And then there's 2 or 3 students where the IEP team has determined that because of their needs, they're going to go on a separate vehicle that might be kind of on that same route, but it's separate out from the other students. That route and that trip or that vehicle would be eligible for special education aid or IDEA formula funding. But there's other pieces of specialized transportation that doesn't mean a different route. So for instance, you have that regular, the regular elementary school route that is picking up some students, students with and without IEPs, but a couple of the students with IEPs, because of behavioral issues tied to their disability, sort of need additional support on that regular route. And that would be like a paraprofessional or transportation aid. And that individual is on the route because that is the least restricted environment for all the students with IEPs. But the couple of students who require or need a paraprofessional or additional support on that route, that's in the student's IEP. And that paraprofessional or the transportation aid, their costs would be eligible for IDA formula or state categorical aid, but the bus route itself is not eligible. So the mileage, the bus driver, all of those costs are just general education or general costs, whereas anything that's above and beyond that general cost tied to the needs in a student's IEP, those costs would be eligible. So a common thing is transportation aides or paraprofessionals. Again, they're because of the needs for those students who have that service needed, required in their IEP. The other one is when we talked about whether or not the student had accessibility or need for adaptive or assistive equipment. That doesn't automatically mean that that student needs a different route or a different vehicle. It could simply mean that you're using the same vehicle that you use for all of your routes, but you were able to install or maintain equipment on it, such as safety harnesses or a wheelchair lift. That installation of the equipment and maintaining that equipment would be eligible for special education aid, but it's still keeping the route as general. And so those are the pieces that are eligible for grant funding or state aid. but not the route itself. And so in this example, what I was just talking about it on the regular route where let's say that there are 40 students on that route and 7 of them are students with IEPs, but only 2 of those 7 have specialized transportation in their IEP, and that specialized transportation is related to having a paraprofessional on that regular route to support them. Those 2 students, so all of those students, all 7 students, are still counted as regular education students for the purposes of transportation aid. So it's a paraprofessional piece that is the excess cost that's eligible for other funding, whereas all of the students on that regular route are all counted as regular education students for the purpose of transportation aid. So even though 2 of them had specialized transportation in their IEP, it wasn't a different route. It was just basically kind of supplemental services. So this next piece is key, and I often wonder, how involved the folks are at LEAs that are managing transportation, or the business office is in understanding what's actually in the student's IEP for transportation, for specialized transportation, because this is kind of, to me, there's 2 sides of the coin. There are LEAs who accidentally maybe count routes towards special education aid that shouldn't, because the students on the route do not have specialized transportation in their IEP. And the flip side of that is that specialized transportation is being provided, but the way it's written in the IEP isn't clear, and there's misunderstandings between like the staff and the parents and the LEA about what the specialized transportation should include. And when it comes to IDEA complaints and the work the procedural compliance does, transportation issues come up often, and this is what they're looking for. They're looking for the detail in the IEP that explain really, really in detail what the IEP team is saying the student needs in order to receive FAPE. So when the IEP is not clear, then that is when IDEA complaints come up, whether or not something is actually eligible for state aid or grant funding, and just kind of go down there. So as someone in the business office or managing transportation, this is sort of supposed to be your map of what is specialized transportation in a student's IEP. And if this is missing, if these items are missing or not clear, that can lead to a lot of issues. In addition, if there are things that are not in the IEP that your LEA is providing, that's the other piece, is there might be things that you're providing that you actually aren't responsible for because it's not in the IEP. Again, just because it's a student, because a student is a student with an IEP does not automatically equalize specialized transportation, and everything around specialized transportation might not actually be your responsibility if it was not in the IEP. So just things like that. Another thing to think about with specialized transportation, we talked about like routes and vehicles and the services kind of above and beyond the route, but this also will involve parent contracts. So if one of the things that the IEP team has determined is that the student can't ride on the regular route with all the other students because of their disability, and really the most feasible and realistic way to get that student to school is through the parent. And so there's an agreement that the parent would get reimbursement for mileage and things like that. That all needs to be in the IEP very clearly. Those, how that's going to work needs to be in the IEP so everyone's clear on what the expectations are. So that was specific to and from school. The other situations that come up is if an IEP team has determined that a student will receive FAPE through a placement that is not their home school. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be a private school or a CESA alternative service. It could actually just be another school within the district that is not on the normal like bus route for the student's home to school. So let's say the program that best suits the student is across town. So the placement is made not at the student's home elementary school. Once that placement is made, that means transportation to that placement needs to be in the IEP, because this has to be at no cost to the parents. So the placement is at no cost to the parents, and then getting that student to that placement is at no cost to the parents. So if a placement is made in the Richardson School, which is a private school that works with school districts, then that transportation to the Richardson School would be considered specialized transportation and in the student's IEP. So it all goes back to how is that student going to access FAPE? And if that means that transportation needs to be provided, then that would go in the IEP. Again, once that placement is made, it's not a foregone conclusion that, all right, well, you can see here that the placement's the Richardson School, so we don't have to say anything about transportation because, you know, we have to get the student to Richardson School. Nope, specialized transportation still needs to be added as a related service in the IEP specific to getting the student to that placement. That is another issue that we see come up in IEPs, that the placement is clear, but the transportation is not. The other situation is students with IEPs that are attending the state school. So Wisconsin School for the Deaf, which is in Delavan, and Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which is in Janesville. And this is actually in state statute, along with considerations for the IEP. So in Wisconsin statute, there is a requirement that students who are attending either of the state schools, the resident LEA is responsible for transportation. And this cost then is also eligible for state special education categorical aid or IDEA formula funding. So there is incidental benefit with transportation, but it's very, very, very narrow. And by incidental benefit with specialized transportation, especially when we're talking about like a different route or a different vehicle, is if a student, and this I think more about our rural LEAs, where if you have a student who lives in Kendall, Wisconsin, and attending Royal School District, if you have a vehicle going out to Kendall to pick up a student who has specialized transportation in their IEP and getting them back to school, that if that student has a sibling, that you wouldn't be required to send out two different vehicles to pick up the student and the student's sibling, that the sibling can ride in the vehicle or the route with the student who has specialized transportation in their IEP, as long as the pickup location is the same. So same house, same curb, that you can't displace a student with an IEP from the route. So if that one student, if there's 4 spaces on the vehicle and that 4 spaces already taken up, then the sibling can't ride. So it has to be like a space available for the sibling to ride on the route. And basically you can't incur any additional cost for transporting the student without an IEP. So that's kind of the checklist there. But yes, there's nothing saying that that you have to leave the sibling at home and go get another vehicle to go pick up the sibling. So it's kind of the common sense measure, but being clear though, again, that specialized transportation shouldn't be the common thing. It should be the rare thing, because students with IEPs should be able to ride on regular routes with their non-disabled peers. But now going into incidental benefit though, is a little bit different than when we're talking about McKinney-Vento transportation.
Okay, I'm jumping back in. So, just really wanted to point out to everybody too, since we're both talking about McKinney-Vento earlier and not special education, transportation, is that when you have a student who has an IEP and who is experiencing homelessness, the need for transportation as a related service is separate from the school's obligation to provide transportation under McKinney-Vento. So they need to be considered, I guess, just considered separately. The IEP team could decide that specialized transportation is needed because of a related service for the student to meet their needs. But it could not be added to their IEP simply because the student is now experiencing homelessness. So again, it really goes back to what are the students' needs, and is transportation needed? And then IDA funds should be used to provide transportation if it's a related service in the IEP. If it's not a related service in the IEP, but the student is receiving other services through their IEP, but not transportation, then that transportation needs to be funded in the same manner as any other student that's experiencing homelessness. So really just wanted to highlight that for you all.
And then there is flexibility. So this isn't incidental benefit, because incidental benefit's more of like kind of could be a long-term thing, like the whole school year, the siblings riding along. But in order to meet the requirements in McKinney-Vento and ESSA, when a situation comes up where there is a student who's newly experiencing homelessness or foster care, and you're doing your due diligence to make sure that that student gets to school, and it just happens that like a specialized route or vehicle is there and available and can pick up that student while you get together and figure out a more permanent solution, you can use specialized routes for students newly experiencing homelessness or new to foster care for up to 20 school days. That should give you a month to kind of come up with a different plan. It's not going to impact if you're charging the cost against the IDEA formula grant or submitting the transportation cost for state special education categorical aid. It's not going to suddenly make that route invalid for funding, but it's limited. It's just supposed to give you a quick solution with the idea that you're going to come up with a more permanent solution later. And again, it's kind of the same thing though. Even though this flexibility exists, it can't displace a student who requires specialized transportation or cause significant disruption to students with IEP. So sometimes students are on specialized transportation because of their disability, and sometimes it's sensory issues or behavioral issues. And so suddenly picking up other kids on their route, you have to keep in mind, like, there's flexibility that exists, but is this going to do harm to the students that are on the specialized route? And keep that in mind when you are using this flexibility. So that being said, once you've determined when it comes to IDEA formula funding, basically once that specialized transportation is in a student's IEP, everything related to that specialized transportation is eligible for IDEA formula grant funding. You have it on the flow through a preschool budget. Once you've incurred the expense, you submit the claim and you get your funding reimbursed at 100%. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rick, who's going to talk about, look at all those bullet points. This was IDEA funding right there. Submit a claim, get your money. All right, Rick, tell them what they have to do.
All right, Rick, your challenge is to move this one along.
Can you see my screen, everyone?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I only have 2 slides, but I've included a lot of hyperlinks that will allow you to reaccess the resources that are related to state aid, as well as the reporting, fiscal reporting. The main thing to understand is that licensure requirements for any staff are very important in terms of fiscal reporting for state categorical aid for special education, and also that there are specific woofer coding that needs to be applied. And I've tried to include those all in here. There is a link. Oh, did I go back a screen? Okay, here we go. So for both regular special education, which is Fund 27, and high cost special education, all the reporting is done in WISE Data Finance. And then for the approval and certification of the reporting, all that data is pulled into WSFIP in a specific module. There is a link that will provide information about resolving common errors and then getting your access if you don't have it already. Fund 27, function 256, 1000 series is where transportation is coded. And for special education, that state categorical aid, and you probably know this already as business managers, you're going to use either project code 11 or 19. 11, again, is going to be that aidable portion of Fund 27, and 019 is the non-aidable portion. For staffing considerations, just to point out real quick, a driver's portion of time that is attributable to that route and does not require a specific education-specific license, special education-specific license, is eligible for aid. And then a bus aide who does have the eligible license is required if it's specifically for special education. Rachel went over some of the information for incidental benefits. That still applies. Contracted transportations. I know a lot of people are familiar with the 436,000. For purposes of state categorical aid and high cost, you record it to their specific 100,000 or 200,000 level. There is a really good resource here for specialized transportation examples. Some of them Rachel went over already. I've included a link and the page numbers. And then on the next slide, just so everyone knows, if you don't already, there is a WISE Data Finance and Financial Reporting podcast that Matt Beyer runs, and I sometimes chime in. That's every other week. You can sign up at that link. The special ed reporting opens August 1st this year. This is going to be state categorical aid. And the initial reporting is all due by October 20th. And then the high cost reporting is moved up a little bit this year. That'll start in December and end in February. Once again, any of the aid that you're claiming for the fiscal year 2024-25, which we're currently in, is what you'll be reporting in the next fiscal year and then get paid out on. The no valid license reporting, which I know Rachel loves personally because it's such a fun task to do, that's all due by September 29th. And then SPED aid or special education aid is paid out over 6 payments throughout the year, starting in November, pausing in March, and then the final payment is made in June. There is a link here for you to sign up for the School Finance Bulletin, which gives important updates on a regular basis to anything school financial related from DPI. And then there's another link for valid reporting and licensing codes, because again, state categorical aid is fairly important for licensing. That's what the whole concept of special education aid is when I review the claims. So I know I rushed through that, but I made it with just under 1 minute to spare. My contact information, as well as Rachel and Christine's, are in the last page. You should always feel free to reach out to me for financial reporting questions for state categorical and high cost aid. Always willing to help.
Wow, Rick, that was amazing.
I was going to mention quick when you were talking about the valid license. That is something that comes up. So if you have like an aide or a paraprofessional on a bus, they should have a minimum of that special education aid license to be eligible. So it's really any DPI license qualifies you to be a special education aid. But know that at a minimum, you need that special education aid license, which is really just kind of a background check.
Well, you guys could all be in charge of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, the way you managed your 60 minutes. I'm very impressed. I want to expand on one last point that came up. I always enjoy listening to Rachel. I learn something every time, and I was focusing on the fact that in an IEP meeting, that's where the commitments are being made for for certain service levels to meet the needs of an individual child, and that's as it should be. In my experience, it's exceedingly rare to ever have the business manager actually physically attend an IEP,
Right.
for a couple reasons. One, there's often an advocate in the room, and if you don't want to get in the room with an advocate, if you don't really know exactly what you're doing, and often business managers are maybe a step or two behind because they're focused on budget all the time. And frankly, there's enough adults in the IEP meeting.
Yeah.
It's already super intimidating for parents to be in there. So my remedy was, oh, the other point is the IEP docs themselves are very closely guarded documents. You don't want those floating around the school district. So that creates this opportunity for miscommunication. Business office doesn't know what transportation is supposed to do related to special ed. Anyway, the remedy for that, the best thing I ever did when I started working in bigger districts was a standing monthly meeting between the special ed director or student services director and myself and another member of the business office team. And that's where we would tie up all these loose ends. That's how we got on the same page. It's probably the best hour you can spend every month within the central administration is sit down with the business manager and special ed people and just go over all this stuff because you can see where all the mistakes can happen. And I don't mean talking to each other in the hallway for 30 seconds after the admin team meeting. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a dedicated half hour or an hour with an agenda, and trust me, it'll save you a lot of trouble later. Okay, I just took us over time, but I wanted
Yeah,
to
no,
make that
that
point.
is an absolutely excellent suggestion. And yeah, I should have been, so the IEP team has to create a plan for a student to receive FAPE that is not limited by resources available, right? Like under IDA. So you're right. Having a business manager in there would not. Yep. I love your suggestion. It's more what I was trying to get at, and you said it perfectly, was understanding what the IEP team has committed to and making sure that, like, again, what have they really committed to in the IEP team versus what they're telling you is needed is, I think, where the IDA complaints come about. So
That might be
yep,
the only time
thanks.
I've ever explained anything perfectly. This is a big
That
win
was
for me
actually, I
today.
thought that
All
was a
right.
really excellent suggestion, and I hope people take you up on that,
Yeah.
because that would, procedural compliance would love it if
Yeah.
everybody did that too.
This has been a fantastic presentation, guys, and we're going to share this out to all of WASBO with some follow-up emails. Can't thank you guys enough. I know how busy you are over at the department, so thank you for shedding some light on these complicated topics. I'm going to go all the way back to Claire, Christine, Rick, Rachel. Really appreciate the partnership between the field and the department. So thanks, and hey, have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you down the road.